Okay, everybody, thank you for coming. First, let me just announce the dedications. The shir tonight is dedicated for praying for the victory of our soldiers in all fronts of the war, the lasting unity of Am Yisroel, and for all of those whose health has been affected by the war, and obviously for the safe return of all of the hostages who are still alive. Aliyat Neshamot, an elevation of the soul for Yitzchak Hirsh ben Eliezer. And then we have other dedications, Shaina Ita bas Esther Malka, and Moshe Yitzchak ben Rivka Minva, that they should be zocha to the bracha of children, dedicated by Malka Finkel. The entire series during the month of Adar is sponsored by Rina and Mark Questel in honor and appreciation of Rabbi Breitowitz for his zechus for the safety and success of the Tzahal and return of the hostages, and Lezecher Nishmas Harav Yisroel ben Refael Zev. And finally, YIBONEH wants to thank all of those who have contributed to the Matanot Yonim Fund. Many of the recipients have expressed their gratitude and brought so many simcha for the Chag. But again, the cycle of tzedakah never ends. So Baruch Hashem, we hopefully helped people over Purim, but now we have to think about helping people as we approach the holiday of Pesach, which is even more expensive. And therefore, I guess not this week, but pretty soon, there will be what is called Ma'os Chitim, which is the collection of funds to give out for people to help them meet the Pesach expenses. Obviously, I am not in my regular time. I am here an hour or an hour and a half early, and that is because my yeshiva that I work, Or Sameach, we recently had the very great tragedy of losing the founder of Or Sameach, the Rosh HaYeshiva, Rav Nata Schiller of blessed memory, who founded Or Sameach more than 50 years ago. And he had been ill for around 3 years, and he passed away shortly before Purim, and all of us are still kind of in a devastated state. But tonight, shortly after the Shiva, there's a special memorial service at 8:30, and although, technically I could have had an excuse because I would be here, but Rabbi Poston was kind enough to rearrange the schedule so I would be able to return to Or Sameach for the memorial service. And in addition to all the dedications, I'd like to exercise my prerogative to also dedicate the shir Lezecher Nishmat Rav Nata Schiller, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. And again, it's a tremendous loss. The truth is, most of the present students in Or Sameach didn't even know him that well because he had been sick. He had not really been in yeshiva, except for Rosh Hashanah he would come or something like that. But for those of us who have been around a little longer, he really was kind of a father. And many people expressed the idea that they felt they lost a father. His office was right next to mine. And in his healthy years, he would constantly pop in to tell me a story or an insight or a joke or whatever it would be. And it always had a point to it, meaning it wasn't just entertainment, although it was entertaining. But he had all sorts of beautiful, very deep insights. A very, very brilliant man, not only in Torah, but everything, politics, history. Baseball was one of his specialties. He knew high culture and he knew low culture even. Abbott and Costello, whatever it would be. He had a whole wealth of knowledge, but he was able to draw on that knowledge. Draw on every little bit of information that he absorbed in his life and was able to derive Torah lessons. And I think that's an important insight for us, something to aspire to. We go through different things. We're not always in a 100% Torah environment. We deal with the secular world in various ways, but a Jew kind of learns from everything. We try to learn from every type of experience. Ezeyu Chacham Pirkei Avot says, who is a wise person? Halomed mikol adam. That somehow we learn from everybody, and we take a lesson in how we serve God. And I think Rabbi Schiller in his own life exemplified that, and that's one of the things he passed down to us. So again, I'm very grateful to Rabbi Poston for rearranging. I know how difficult it is to rearrange schedules, and I do very much appreciate this. Okay, so we're dealing with the building of the Mishkan. Now you might be wondering, didn't we deal with that last week? And didn't we deal with that the week before? And didn't we deal with that the week before that? Yes. And we're going to deal with it next week too. 5 Parshiot of the Torah, 5 weeks dealing with the Mishkan. Gee, we know that the Torah is very economical when it comes to words. The Torah does not convey things in 2 words if it can convey it in 1 word. And yet the Mishkan, on and on and on and on. Every time you get a full-length repetition. God says it to Moshe, A to Z. And then it says Moshe tells it to us, A to Z. And then we do it, A to Z. The Torah could have just said the Jewish people did whatever Moshe was told, etc. But every single time it reiterates it. And I'm not going to give you, that's not the point of my talk tonight. I'm not going to give you a full answer to this very difficult question, other than to highlight the obvious point that there's something so central in the idea of Mishkan that it bears constant reiteration and constant repetition. Because remember the key verse that inaugurated the whole building of the Mishkan. V'yasu li mikdash, make for me a sanctuary, a holy place, a holy space. V'shachanti b'tocham, so I will rest in them. So the commentaries make the point, it doesn't say God rests in it. Rather, the idea of a Mishkan is the idea of making a sanctuary in your heart and in your soul for the Almighty. There's a famous, beautiful song taken from Rabbi Eliezer Askari, one of the great Kabbalists in the time of the Ari, Bilvavi Mishkan Evnech. In my heart, I will construct a sanctuary. I mean, Lahabdil is actually a beautiful shaker melody about sanctuary, but it's actually based on this idea. And that's what life is about. Life is about making our heart and our soul a dwelling place for the Almighty, a sanctuary for God. Do we always live up to that? Certainly not. Or at least I'll speak for myself. I certainly do not always live up to that. But that's the aspiration. And that's why it's repeated over and over and over again, because the fundamental ideas of life have to be reiterated. Because maybe our head might grasp it by learning it once. But to go from the head to the heart is quite a long distance. And sometimes things need to be repeated, reiterated, integrated, so they influence you, so they elevate you. And that's kind of, again, it's not a complete answer, obviously, but this is part of what's going on with all of this repetition about the Mishkan. The Mishkan, of course, in the desert, the Mishkan was a traveling sanctuary. Of course, once we get to Jerusalem, we have the Beit HaMikdash, but the idea is the same. It is symbolic of the presence of God in our heart and in our soul. And when God is not in our heart and our soul, the building becomes a building. In fact, the Medrash tells us, when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the first temple, Nebuchadnezzar was very proud. In his arrogance, he said, I have driven God out of his house. And the Medrash actually has the Almighty speaking to Nebuchadnezzar and saying, don't think you drove me out of my house. I didn't live there anymore. When the Jewish people no longer had God in their heart and in their soul, I leave. So you destroyed a vacant house. It's a nice house, a nice hotel, but nobody was living there anymore. That's the idea. Because essentially, God is in the temple when God is in our heart. Therefore, when God is not in our heart, God is not in the temple. And that's why the temple gets destroyed. Meaning, you can't destroy the house of God when God is there. But you can destroy it when God isn't there, because it's simply an empty building at that particular point. This is what the Medrash says. God told Nebuchadnezzar one way or the other. So first, let me start with a very, very technical point. I know some people are very much into the Jewish calendar, so you would appreciate this. Other people are not into the Jewish calendar. They won't appreciate this. But I'll just give you a little technical point for those who enjoy it. It'll only be 5 minutes. And that is, anyone who studies the Torah reading of the week, the Parshat Shavua, knows that sometimes 2 parshios are combined. and sometimes two parshiot are separated. And the normal rule is the following. When we have a regular year, a non-leap year, without an extra month, so the parshiot will certain parts will be combined because otherwise you'd have too many parshiot for too few weeks. In leap years, when you have 4 extra weeks, we separate. Now, VaYakhel Pekudei, this week's Parsha, next week's Parsha, are normally together on non-leap years, and they're separated on leap years. That's the normal pattern. Now, this year is not a leap year. We don't have a second Adar. So you would expect, as it were, that VaYakhel Pekudei should be read together because this is a non-leap year. And yet, lo and behold, this is a comparatively rare instance where even though it's a non-leap year, VaYakhel Pekudei are going to be read 2 different weeks, this week and next week. This could be called an anomaly, so to speak. It's a yotzei min haklal. It is an exception to the norm. So the rule is the following. This only happens when there's a particular configuration in the Jewish calendar where Rosh Hashanah, as it did this year, 5785, falls out on Thursday, Friday, meaning Wednesday night, Thursday, Friday, and the month of Cheshvan and the month of Kislev, which can sometimes have variable 29-30, both have 30 days. And based on that, when that happens, inevitably, Pesach, this first Seder, is going to be Saturday night, Motzei Shabbat. So because of that unique configuration, there happens to be one extra Shabbat that's not covered in the Yom Tov, because the Shabbos is right before Pesach. As a result, even though most of the joined parshiot are going to be joined, but there has to be one extra Shabbat, so VaYakhel Pekudei was chosen to separate. So just remember this, you can really impress your friends. You can ask your friends, because not too many people know this particular bit of data, and that is, hey, how come, VaYakhel Pekudei are separate this year? And you will have the answer. Obvious. Everybody knows when Rosh Hashanah is Thursday, Friday, and Cheshvan and Kislev are both 30 days, and therefore the first Seder is Saturday night, you have one extra Shabbos in the whole year in which the parshiot have to be separated in order to cover that Shabbat. And people will be very impressed with your knowledge and your erudition. Okay, little technical point for those who enjoy the Jewish calendar. But what I want to talk about is this. On one hand, we're reading about the Mishkan, the tabernacle of space, physical space. And yet, this Parsha brings to mind another tabernacle, another temple, a sanctuary of time. Again, let's look at just the beginning of the Parsha. VaYakhel, Moshe gathers the people, and he addresses them. Again, just a little bit of timing here. Rashi explains, this is the day after Yom Kippur, the first Yom Kippur. Remember what happened? There was the sin of the golden calf, and God wanted to destroy the Jewish people and make a private covenant with Moshe. And Moshe refused. He didn't want any private deals. He said, you erase them, erase me. And Moshe prays and he davens and helps causes Klal Yisrael to do tshuva. And finally, on Rosh Chodesh Elul, God says, come up for the second 40 days and bring down the second tablets because you had broken the first ones. And Moshe comes down. What day does it come down with the second luchot? Yom Kippur. People don't realize this. The Day of Atonement is the day that Moshe brought down the second luchot. In some ways, it's more of a day of receiving the Torah than even Shavuos. Right, Shavuos, we heard the 10 Commandments. But the luchot that Moshe brought down, the 17th of Tammuz, 40 days after Shavuot, were smashed. Yom Kippur are the luchot Shniot, the second luchot. So Moshe Rabbeinu brought down that second luchot. By the way, as an aside, I'm going to digress occasionally. Let me share with you a very beautiful thought of the Mabit. Moshe ben Yosef Trani was the head of the Beis Din of Tzfat in the time of Rav Yosef Karo. So very, very esteemed time of the Arizal. You know, this is when Tzfat was the dominant Torah center of Eretz Yisrael. So the Mabit was not only a great posek, he was also a Jewish philosopher. And he wrote a work of Jewish philosophy that has never been translated into English. It's called Beis Elokim, the House of God. And he makes the following observation. It's a well-known idea that the Decalogue is divided into two, right? The first 5 are considered to be commandments between man and God. And the second 5 are largely commandments between man and man. Okay, that's a well-known distinction, although there are some questions on that, because commandment number 5, for example, which should belong to the man God, is honor your father and mother. Okay, but there are reasons, because essentially your relationship to God is connected to your relationship to your parents who gave you life. Okay. But the Mabit goes off on a different point. He says, we assume that the surface area of the engraving covered the same area, in the sense that, you know, the surface that was covered, that was engraved, would be the same. Now the problem is, the first 5 have many more words than the second 5. The second 5 are very staccato. Don't kill, don't steal, don't give false testimony. Which means, if the surface area of the engraving was the same for the man to man as the man to God, that means by definition, the letters of the man to man must have been larger letters than the man to God. So when Moshe comes down from the mountain at Mount Sinai, and people see him from a distance, and they put on their long distance glasses, and they want to squint and see what he's bringing down, what will they be able to read first? The man to man. So Mabit makes the point that sometimes, you know, we have a very distorted idea of what it means to be a religious Jew. We think, you know, religious Jew, you wear tefillin, you keep kosher, you keep Shabbos, and of course that is obviously very important. But we don't automatically associate being honest in business, integrity, kindness. We kind of look at that maybe as universal values, but they're not, you know, Jewish, distinctly Jewish. And yet you see that the interpersonal is even given a greater prominence than the between man and God, because in the Luchot, the second 5 were larger than the first. Okay, that's my bit. Okay, but going back to the Parsha. So Moshe came down on Yom Kippur with the Luchot. VaYakhel, he gathers the people, is the day after Yom Kippur. He assembles the people. And he's now going to command them to contribute towards the Mishkan. But before he does that, he seems to talk about another topic. 6 days shall you work, and on the 7th day it shall be the Shabbat of God. You shall not do any type of malacha, don't do any type of work. Of course, this is a reiteration of the 4th commandment. This is not the first time we've encountered Shabbat. This is at least the third or the 4th time, depending on whether you count, you know, Genesis as the first reference and the like. But Moshe is commanding them about doing malacha, doing work for 6 days, and resting on Shabbos. Now the question is, Shabbos is important. Why is it here? Why is it here exactly? So Rashi explains that this is not just a general exhortation about Shabbos, but he's specifically connected to the Mishkan, that even though I'm giving you a commandment that thou shalt construct this tabernacle, on the day of Shabbos, even the importance of building a temple does not override the sanctity of Shabbos. So this is not just the generic commandment of Shabbos. This is a specific prohibition. Do not build the tabernacle on Shabbos. Not only that, but the connection is so essential that the very definition of what is a prohibited labor are those activities that are involved in building the tabernacle. The famous idea that there are 39 prohibited categories of work on Shabbos. The Torah doesn't say. There are a few activities the Torah mentions. The Torah says don't start a fire. It mentions don't plow, don't harvest. But if I ask you, where does the Torah say don't cook on Shabbat? Don't write on Shabbos? It doesn't say. The only way we know these things are prohibited is because these were activities that were connected to the construction of the tabernacle in various ways. And therefore, whatever is involved in the construction of the Mishkan is forbidden on Shabbos. So, what is often expressed is that the Mishkan represents the holiness of time. The Mishkan is holiness of space. The Shabbos is holiness of time. And the halacha that you don't build a Mishkan on Shabbos actually says Judaism is more concerned, on the deepest level, with the holiness of time more than the holiness of space. Because the holiness of time you can take with you wherever you go in life. You see, this is a certain paradox in Judaism. On one hand, we say God is everywhere. God is accessible everywhere. In a sense, God exists as much in Fargo, North Dakota, as he exists in the Beis HaMikdash. God is everywhere. On the other hand, Judaism obviously has a certain hierarchy of holy space. Eretz Yisrael is holier than any other place. Yerushalayim, Beis HaMikdash, within the Beis HaMikdash even, there are many, many levels till you come to the Kodesh HaKodashim. So there's a certain paradox in which on one hand God transcends place, on the other hand there are special places. And the understanding is, when I say a given place is holier, that doesn't mean God is here more than there. God is everywhere, but it means God is more accessible to my ability to receive him. Meaning, just like you have a cell phone, right? There are dead zones which can't receive. So God is everywhere. The sound waves are everywhere, but I can't pick them up. So the holiness of a makom is a function of the ability to access that connection. But be it as it may, although we of course believe that places are holier than other places, no question about it, but there's a subtle yetzer hara, there's a subtle evil inclination in that type of thought. That is, sometimes when people are not in the optimal situation, they feel they can't have a connection to God. For example, a person might say, if only I would be in Jerusalem, if only I would be in yeshiva, if only I would have the right family, if only I would have the right circumstances, then I can serve God. But what does God want of me if I'm bereft of all of those things? But that's a mistake. Because once you understand that the holiness of time transcends the holiness of space, then it doesn't make a difference where you are. The ability to access God everywhere. Every Shabbat, I have my Beit HaMikdash within time. And that is why the halacha expresses itself that the building of the building of the Mikdash or the Mishkan cannot be done on Shabbos, because Shabbos represents a temple, a Mikdash, a connection to God that is even higher and more transcendent than the holiness of space, right? The holiness of time versus the holiness of space. And that is why Moshe Rabbeinu introduces the idea of Shabbos. Now, not, as I say, as a general repetition of the fourth commandment, but specifically because of its connection to the Mishkan. Now, what's interesting is, and by the way, there are many, as you know, the Torah is interpreted in 70 ways, and every single word in the Torah has so many different nuances of meaning. Even something like, do not burn a fire on the day of Shabbos. So I want to tell you a little story. I may have said it before, so forgive me. This happened when I was, I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, and I went to an Orthodox day school, but it was a co-ed day school, and most of the kids were not even Shomer Shabbos in those days, because this was before Salman Schechter. This is before the conservative movement had their day schools. So any parent, conservative, reform, or Orthodox, who wanted the kids to have a Jewish education, sent them to the Orthodox schools. So the Orthodox schools were not as stratified or polarized as they are today, because we went to school with everybody. So when I was in 7th grade, that's when the boys and the girls started having their bar mitzvahs and bas mitzvahs. So I remember that I was invited to a classmate's bar mitzvah in a Reform synagogue. I'm not going to address the halachic issues then. I wasn't thinking about it in those terms. But the Reform synagogue was like a 5-mile walk from my house in the summer. And Hartford did not have an Erev then. So I was walking. Of course, I was in better shape then. I was younger. And I'm walking. And all of a sudden, a car stops by. My 7th grade teacher stops by and says, "Can I give you a ride?" Who was a Jewish woman. Very, very fine woman. Actually, she died recently at like 102, so she just died very recently. But she stopped and offered me a ride. And I said, "Well, I can't really go." She says, "Why can't you go? What's?" So I started saying, I was like 12, so I started saying, "Well, we're not allowed to do work on Shabbos. And if I go, my extra weight is going to cause more consumption of gasoline, and that's called a fire on Shabbos. And, we're supposed to rest, and we're not supposed to do work." So she says to me, "So let me get this straight. You're telling me you can't go into an air-conditioned car that's going to take you to the place you need to go in 2 minutes, because that's called doing work. So instead you're going to walk 5 miles without water, and that's not called doing work." She says, "I don't get it." So at that point I was kind of confused and flustered, so I just kind of got myself out of there. But it's not a bad question. What's going on here? Yeah, I go into a car, my weight is going to cause a certain minuscule consumption of gasoline that halachically is fire, got it. But you're telling me walking 5 miles without water in the heat? That's not work. That's okay? Like, what's going on? And, people always raise the question, too. Well, in the olden days, I'm sure you've heard this, in the olden days, making a fire required, rubbing 2 sticks together for an hour. Now, what are you saying? Flicking an electric light, is fire. It's not work. So the important idea here, and this is a generally important idea to keep in mind, is Rabbi Shimshon Refael Hirsh, the great 19th century German rabbi, actually explains that the operative word for not doing prohibited things on Shabbat, which is malacha, which we often translate as work or labor, he says is a bit of a misnomer, because the definition of malacha is not a function of physical exertion, but it's a function of mastery or dominion over the raw materials of God's creation. Meaning to say the following: God made the world in 6 days. He rested on the 7th day. Every Shabbat is a celebration that God is the creator and architect of the universe. So what I refrain from on Shabbat is exercising my creative dominion over the raw materials of the universe, and therefore of the world. Therefore, if Hirsh says, the very definition of malacha involves a certain amount of creative control, whether it's plowing, planting, harvesting, grinding, cooking, skinning an animal, sewing things. What's going on here is not the work in the sense of physical effort, but the transformation of the raw material into something. That's why under Torah law, without getting into all the halachot, a purely destructive act, if you simply blow up a building for no constructive purpose, you just want to get rid of a building and you don't plan to do anything positive on the site, as much exertion as that may have taken, it is not a malacha. Under Torah law, it's forbidden rabbinically, but it's not malacha, because malacha requires some constructive activity. So as a result, when people make the argument, oh, why is turning on a switch malacha? There's no physical effort. If anything, it ought to be worse. It shows a greater mastery, a greater control, a greater dominion over the raw materials of the universe. Fire itself, the use of fire. Fire is one of the great media that transforms raw materials into finished products and the like. So Malacha, again, Hirsh has a bit of an idiosyncratic linguistic system. I mean, obviously, Malacha and Melech are not related. They're two different roots. But Hirsh has an opinion. If they share common letters, you can unite them. And therefore, Melech, which is dominion, and Malacha, which is work or labor, share those common letters. And therefore, the common denominator of Malacha is dominion and control over the raw materials of nature, right? So this is Rav Hirsch's idea of Malacha, and that's a very useful definition because it reminds you that the issue is not physical exertion. The issue is creative mastery over the world, because I refrain from that mastery to acknowledge that God is the source of creation. Interestingly enough, and this is fascinating, the one mastery that is permitted on Shabbat might be the greatest creative act of all, and that's the creation of life, right? The marital intimacy of husband and wife is permitted on Shabbat, even though you might wind up creating a child, and that, of course, would be the most godly form of creation there is, and yet, precisely there, God is inviting you to become his partner. So there are some inconsistencies here, but the inconsistencies themselves are quite beautiful. And that is, on Shabbat, we also, on one hand, we acknowledge God's mastery, and at the same time, we acknowledge God's partnership, invitation to kind of be a partner with him in the creation of the world. So Shabbat is a very, very, very big deal. Needless to say, you know, the chief rabbi of South Africa, Rabbi Goldstein, has created a wonderful project for the past few years, Shabbat project, in which he's trying to get 1 million Jews to keep Shabbat throughout the world, and they designate a Shabbat for that. And, you know, Baruch Hashem, Achad Ha'am, Usher Ginsburg, who was not an Orthodox Jew at all, he's a famous Zionist thinker, but he went by the pen name Achad Ha'am, cultural Zionist as opposed to political Zionist. Again, he differed with Herzl on a number of things. But Achad Ha'am did make the famous statement, more than the Jews have kept the Shabbos, Shabbos has kept the Jewish people. And there's no question of the centrality of Shabbat. And we have to think in our own lives. And this is sometimes a little bit of a challenge for religious people here. Because, you know, when you're new to Shabbat, everything is special, everything is wonderful, everything is unique, exciting. But you keep Shabbat 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 10 years, 50 years. You know, at some point it becomes habitual, it becomes second nature, which is good. But on the other hand, we can sometimes lack the enthusiasm. We can sometimes lack the passion. You know, people, you know, Or Sameach, where I teach, is largely a yeshiva for beginners or returnees to Judaism. And sometimes famous rabbis come to Or Sameach, people who have been religious their whole lives. And they'll say, I wish I could be a Baal Tshuva too. I wish I could also be someone who returns to Judaism with that great, great passion. Right? So that should also give people a certain amount of strength, because sometimes, going back to the idea that sometimes a person might be ashamed of their background. A person might say, or at least they feel bad. They say, oh, gee, this guy was raised to be a religious Jew his whole life, and he always went to yeshiva, and I didn't start till I was 20 or 25. How can I ever catch up? It's not fair that God put me in, let's say, a non-Torah environment. You know, where's the justice in that? But the answer is a subtle answer. And that is, it's true that we don't have what the 10th generation Yerushalmi has. But it's also true that the person from Fargo, North Dakota has something that the 10th generation Yerushalmi doesn't have. Meaning to say, every person was put where they were put, because that's what their neshama needed to connect to God. Meaning even the years where you were away from Judaism, or were not connected to Judaism, are not dead time. In a sense, they are the fertilizer, so to speak, out of which the identity is formed. That's why, again, forgive me for digressing because different thoughts come to me. That's why sometimes one of the things that people do when they sometimes become religious is they want to cut off their past. Because they want to become part of a new community, they want to make believe that that didn't exist or they're not connected to it. And I would suggest that that's a very big mistake. Because if you're kind of doing tshuva out of amputation, then you're an amputee. Now an amputee, no matter how good and capable they are, is missing something. But there's a higher level of tshuva where you don't amputate the past, but you use the past to form the uniqueness of who you are. And therefore you draw on Fargo, North Dakota, and you draw on those experiences to form your identity in a constructive way. And coming back to Shabbat, that may be a very good example. The newcomer to Shabbat brings enthusiasm and passion. But the habitual Shabbat observer has a big challenge. And we have to find ways to create renewal, excitement. It's not enough just to be Shabbos observant, although that's very, very important. But we have to figure out ways that Shabbat becomes that special day of our unique connection to God. You know, in the States, a few years ago, somebody was trying to devise a halachically permissible way to text message on Shabbat. Very complicated theory. The truth is, I'm not going to get into the halachas here. The theories were not halachically proper. But let's assume some genius could invent a halachically permissible way to text on Shabbos. Let's assume that somehow somebody figured it out. Is that what you want to do? Is that what you want to do? You want to take the Shabbat, which is the one day in which we can escape all of this and leave virtual reality in favor of actual reality. And you say, you know, I invented this great invention. I can make Shabbat just like Tuesday. Huh? You know, that's the progress of 3,000 years of Jewish history. We've converted Shabbat to be everything you do during the week. You know? So we gotta think about this very, very carefully. So, b'kitzur, one thing I wanted to share with you is a little bit of an observation on the prayers of Shabbat. You know, let's take the Amidah. Shabbat is actually very unique of all of the holidays, including Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot. With all of the holidays, the Amidah of Mariv, the evening prayer, Shachris, the morning prayer, and Mincha. Musaf is different, but the three, Shachris, Mariv, Shachris, Mincha, is always the same. It's identical. There is never a change between Arvit to Shachris to Mincha. And this is even true on Yom Kippur, no matter what the day is, it is always the same Amidah. The only sacred day in which there's a different middle in the Amidah, at least the beginning of it, is Shabbos. That Shabbos has a beginning paragraph that is unique for Arvit, and then another one for Shachris, and then another one for Mincha. Friday night, we begin with a paragraph that you have sanctified Shabbat, and we recite VaYakhel, that God made the world in 6 days, and He rested. Shabbat morning, we talk about Moshe bringing down the Luchot, and we recite the verses V'Shamru, B'nai Yisrael, which is actually last week's Parsha, B'nai Yisrael keep the Shabbat. And then Shabbos Mincha, we talk about you are one and your name is one. And who is like your nation, Israel, one unique nation in the world. Different. A different peticha, a different opening paragraph for Mariv, Shachris, Mincha. Now, it then has the same concluding paragraph with one difference I'll get to, accept our rest, and it ends with V'tara Libeno, purify our heart, and Baruch Atah Hashem, blessed are you, Mekadesh Shabbat, who sanctify Shabbos. That's the same in all of them, with one difference I'll get to even on that. But the first paragraph is different. So I want to just share with you two different, although interrelated a little bit, two different interpretations about the different prayers of Shabbat. The first is from Rav David Avudraham. Rav David Avudraham was a Rishon, a medieval rabbi in Spain, who specialized in liturgy. In fact, the works of the Avudraham, as he's called, is one of the definitive works on the Jewish calendar and the Jewish liturgy. In fact, my earlier remarks about VaYakhel Pekudei, why they're together and when they're separate, is from the Avudraham itself, who talks about the rules about joining the Parshiot. And the Avudraham says a very striking idea. He says that the stages of Shabbat correspond to the stages of marital intimacy, marital connection. Shabbat is considered to be a wedding. Now, it's interesting that in Kabbalah it's portrayed as a wedding on two different levels. We almost become androgynous. In one image, Shabbat is the queen, and we are the male uniting with the queen of Shabbat, Shabbat Malka. In another image, we are the Kala, we are the bride, and we're uniting with God. So it's like God is the groom, we are the bride, or we are the groom, and Shabbat is the bride. Like that double marriage is taking place. That is the basis of the song we sing Friday night from Rav Shlomo Alkabetz. L'cha dodi, come my good friend, my beloved friend. Right? Likrat kala, to greet the bride. Penei Shabbat nekabla, let us welcome the Shabbat. Who is the bride? The bride is Shabbat. And by the way, who is the beloved friend? It's not just your next door neighbor. It's God. God is the beloved one that we're coming together with Hashem to welcome the Shabbat. Okay. Now, in a Jewish marriage, there's actually three stages, although we tend to collapse them. There is what is called erusin, which is betrothal. I don't mean engagement, but I mean in the time of the Torah and even in the time of the Gemara, the Chatan would give the Kala a ring or something, a monetary value, would say, you are betrothed to me, and she would be married, but the marriage wouldn't be consummated for a year. Today, we don't wait that long anymore. So stage number one is betrothal. That is called erusin. Another word for erusin is kiddushin, sanctification. So how does the Friday night prayer begin? Atah kiddashta, you have sanctified us. So Friday night is erusin, the beginning of a relationship. The next, which in the time of the Torah and Chazal occurred a year later, but today we do it almost immediately, is nisuin, in which the Chatan brings the Kala into his home. This would be the Yichud room, which is symbolically the home. And that's the Iker Simcha. The primary Simcha is not Erusin, it's Nisuin. And therefore the second stage is a higher level of Simcha. How does the Shacharis prayer begin? Yismach Moshe. Moshe rejoices. And the third level is actual intimacy and union, when we become one. Husband and wife become one. What does the Mincha say? God is one, we are one. Union with God. So this is very striking. The Avudraham is looking at Shabbat as a continuous and deepening process of marriage with God, in which we start with the Erusin, we progress to the Nisuin, and we culminate in the Yichud, in the complete oneness and unity. So by the time you finish Shabbat, you feel one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the trajectory. And that's why there's a sadness, right? The Suda Shlishit, customarily the Nigunim the songs that are sung Suda Shalishit tend to be a bit pensive, slow. There's a certain yearning quality because Shabbat is leaving you. In Havdalah, we have to have spices. Why? Because I'm losing my extra soul. I feel faint. I feel weak. I'm not ready for the challenges of the week, frankly. And that's why Havdalah begins, at least for Ashkenazim. God is my salvation. I shall not be afraid. It's a pasuk, but what do you mean I should not be afraid? It's God telling you, listen, I know it's very scary to leave Shabbat and be confronted with the challenges of the world. A lot of what you think you acquired in the Shabbat, you can lose very simply. But don't be afraid. Shabbat gives you strength. Shabbat gives you courage. Shabbat gives you the ability to go on. As you face the new world, don't be afraid. Shabbat is with you. As the tradition says, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday is still living off the spiritual aura of Shabbat. In fact, even according to Halakha, if you didn't make Havdalah Saturday night, you can still make it Sunday, Monday, Tuesday till sunset. But Wednesday I'm bereft. Don't worry about that. God is giving you an advance on the coming Shabbat. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is getting nourishment from the new Shabbat. So you're never too far away from Shabbat giving you that strength. So this is the Avudraham who looks at this as a marriage. Let me share with you a thought of the Torah. The Torah gives somewhat of a different idea. He says there are 3 pivotal Shabbatot in Jewish existence. 2 of them are past and 1 of them is future. The first Shabbat is God created the world, or God rested from creating the world. That's called Shabbat Bereshit, the Shabbat of the creation of the world. The second pivotal Shabbat is the Shabbat of the giving of the Torah. According to the Gemara in Masechet Shabbos, we heard the 10 Commandments on Shabbos. The first Shavuos was Shabbos. So there's Shabbos Bereshit, the Shabbos of creation. There is the Shabbat of revelation. And then the final Shabbat is not here yet. It is the Shabbat of redemption, the Messianic period, which is described indeed as Yom Shekulo Shabbat, the day of the eternal Shabbat. We haven't gotten there yet. Now, many of you might be familiar with Franz Rosenzweig's famous book, The Star of Redemption, in which he actually says, in his analysis, again, I wouldn't call it an authoritative halakhic source or orthodox source, but he writes that the 3 pillars of redemption, the 3 pillars of Judaism are that creation, revelation, redemption. I'm not sure if he got this from the Torah or not, but the Torah says this is the theme of the 3 davenings. Friday night, which brings the paragraph VaYakhel Hashemayim from Genesis, is celebrating the Shabbat of creation. Shabbat morning, when Moshe brings down the tablets, it's the Shabbat of revelation. And Shabbos Mincha, which talks about the unity between man and God, is the Shabbat of redemption, the Shabbat of the Messianic Shabbat. And how is the days of Mashiach described? By Zechariah, we say it every 3 times a day in Oleinu. Bayomahu yiyah Hashem echad. God will be one and His name will be one. That's exactly what you're saying in the Mincha davening. Yom Shekulo Shabbat. Creation, revelation, redemption. So again, these are interrelated. I'm not saying they're totally different thoughts. Avudraham looks at it as stages in a marriage. The Torah looks at it as moving from creation, revelation, redemption. So I would like just to add to the Torah a certain point, and that is this journey from creation, revelation, redemption is not just a national journey of Am Yisrael, But it's actually a journey that each and every one of us can go through every single Shabbat. The first step to our Shabbat experience is we feel we're reborn, we're recreated. We kind of leave all of the pressures of the work world. We're like, I'm created, I'm liberated. I'm like a newborn baby, doesn't have all of the worries and anxieties. You know, Herman Welk, Allah Fashalom, was not alive anymore, he died over 100. He was an Orthodox Jew, very, very famous writer, playwright, and he was an Orthodox Jew. And he actually wrote quite fine a book about being an Orthodox Jew. This Is My God. And the second edition was reissued just shortly before his death. And he tells a story that when his first novel, I think The Caine Mutiny, was going to be produced as a Broadway play, which for him was a tremendous thing. This was like 1950s, whatever it was. And they were working 18 hours around the clock to get it ready for Broadway. And it was going to open Saturday night. So Friday afternoon, around 2 p.m., he goes to the co-producer and says, I got to go now. The co-producer figured he was going for a cup of coffee. He says, well, be back in 20 minutes. He says, no, you don't understand. I'm going for 28 hours. It was going to open up 8 p.m. Shabbos was over like 6, whatever it is. I'll be here like an hour before opening. So he says, the co-producer didn't even know what to say. He just didn't understand. How can you just leave 25 hours or whatever before this play is going to open? And Herman Welk said that was the first time he realized. He had been Shabbos observant, but he realized what Shabbos is. Shabbos liberates you. Unless it's literally a matter of life and death, in which case life and death override Shabbat. But if it's not life or death, just say no. The world cannot make its demands on me. That's the first stage, creation. I'm created. I don't have those past responsibilities. But that's not enough. Just like Passover, Pesach, is meaningless unless it's connected to Shavuot, which is commitment to God. In the Shabbat, you see the same idea. Being liberated from your weekly chores is a beautiful thing. By the way, this may explain why people are so physically exhausted Friday night, because it's like almost a universal law of nature. Because the work has been lifted and the adrenaline can get turned off. And as a result, your natural state of exhaustion comes to the fore because you don't have that artificial push that's pushing you to keep on going. Well, I have to say, if you're a rabbi, it might be a little different, but okay. Shabbos is a working... Okay, well, I'm not going to gripe here. Okay, I'm not going to use this as a gripe session, but okay. But be it as it may. But here is the relationship between Friday night and Shabbat day. Friday night, I'm liberated. Shabbos day, I'm ready to focus my liberation towards a commitment to God's Torah, which is revelation. Again, it's very symmetrical to the relationship of Pesach and Shavuos. Pesach is freedom, Shavuos is commitment. You need the two that go together. This, I would suggest, is the inner meaning of creation and creation, liberation, and revelation. Now, we then come to redemption. Now, redemption, of course, refers to the messianic redemption, but I think there's also an individualistic, idiosyncratic redemption that's involved here, and that is, it is said in the name of many, many Hasidic masters, some say in the name of Rav Nachman Breslov, some say in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, that the greatest distance in the world is between the head and the heart. Right? The head may know many truths. Intellectually, I may know many, many things. But I haven't yet brought it into my heart to move me emotionally and spiritually. And in many ways, when we talk about redemption from Galut, Galut can exist on many, many levels. There's the Galut from the land. There is the Galut of estrangement from family. There is estrangement within yourself. separation from God, the inner disconnect between my mind and my heart. And when we talk about unity and achdut in the Mincha, we're talking about achieving a redemption in which all of the disunities come together in a harmonious whole. And therefore, the Torah's journey of creation to revelation, to redemption, is the trajectory that each and every one of us can go through every Shabbat. We start with being liberated. We then focus on being committed and directed. And we then culminate with integration, wholesomeness, bringing everything together in a harmonious whole. You know, the expression, a person is in the zone. Sometimes, it may happen relatively rarely, you just feel you're in the right place, and even if you're working very hard, could be in a project, could be anything, you're working very hard, but you don't even feel you have to eat, you don't even have to sleep, you're in the right place. And that happens when everything is in sync. Everything's synchronized. The emotions, the mind, the heart. You're working at a different level because you're connecting to God with all your cylinders, not just hanging on here and there. And that is the final gift of Shabbat, at least in potential. I'm not saying we reach it that often, but at least in potential. Sudah Shalishit, Shabbat Mincha, is the time when you kind of integrate and bring everything together. Now, these thoughts are just part of an infinite richness of the Shabbat, but I think it just reminds us that we can't take it for granted. Yes, Shabbat has a role in sleeping. Sleeping is a good thing on Shabbat too. It says, and I remember when I came, as a kid, kids don't sleep really in the afternoon. So when I came to yeshiva near Israel in Baltimore as a ninth grader, I had never slept on Shabbos afternoon before. And then Shabbos, I still remember my first Shabbat, I was absolutely going nuts because every single person in the yeshiva was taking a nap for Shabbat. I was wandering the halls, like looking for somebody to talk to. There was nobody, right? So sleeping was very foreign to me. But by the second week, I picked up the habit, So I was a quick learner in that way. So yes, Shabbat does have, of course, rest, sleep, eat well. All of that is part of the joy, absolutely. But at the same time, recognize the enormous spirituality of what Shabbat can give you, and never, ever, ever take it for granted. Hashem says to us, I have given you a precious treasure in your midst, and Shabbat is its name. So may all of us merit, and I'm speaking to myself, may all of us merit to appreciate the matana tova that Hashem has given us. So thank you. I do have to run, but thank you so much for coming, and have a Shabbat Shalom. Yeah.